We live in an era where the words are thrown around interchangeably, often losing their precise meaning. Two words that are the biggest casualty in this sort of semantic confusion are the words multi-ethnic and multicultural. We've heard that a bit lately. Pauline Hanson mentioned it in her speech at the press club address. On the surface, they sound like different flavours of the same progressive, harmonious ideal. But if we actually break down what they mean, historically, sociologically, and politically, they represent two fundamental different blueprints for how society functions. So let's start with the basics. Multi-ethnic describes the demographic reality of the population. It simply means a society is made up of individuals from a wide variety of racial, ancestral, and national backgrounds. A multi-ethnic nation is a tapestry of different faces, genetic lineages, and family histories. And that's good. That's a good thing. Whereas multicultural, on the other hand, isn't just about who lives in a country. It describes a political and social philosophy regarding how those people should live. It suggests that a single nation should not only host multiple ethnic groups, but then should actively encourage the coexistence of very distinct, very different, very separate cultural frameworks, belief systems, and legal or social norms within the same borders, often without a core unifying cultural anchor. And I'll give you a sort of a demo or an example shortly. Now, the core difference is that multi-ethnic is about who we are. Multicultural is about how we organise our values. When a society confuses these two concepts, it assumes that, or to celebrate ethnic diversity, it must also abandon the idea of a shared civic culture. But history shows us a completely different reality to that. A nation can be remarkably diverse ethnically while remaining fiercely unified under a single shared societal culture. To understand why multiculturalism can be inherently divisive, we need to look at the cultural mosaic policy model that gained popularity in the late 20th century. The original goal of multiculturalism was noble: to ensure immigrants weren't forced to completely erase their heritage, their language, or faith upon their arrival in a different nation. But over time, the policy shifted from encouraging mutual respect to promoting institutional separation, like we're seeing in the UK. When a state adopts hard multicultural policies, it then stops treating citizens primarily as individuals and starts treating them as members of distinct, different cultural blocks. And this creates a few natural friction points. Competing value systems is one. Culture isn't just about food, music, and traditional clothing. Those are just the surface elements. Deep culture is about ethics, the rule of law, the treatment of women, individual liberty versus collective authority, and freedom of speech. Now, when a nation claims all cultural frameworks are equally valid within its borders, it creates a big vacuum where competing incompatible value systems must then compete for dominance in that system, in that nation. And then we come to the fracturing of social cohesion. Social cohesion relies on a huge degree of trust. And trust is built on shared expectations of behaviour and common civic values. When multiculturalism encourages groups to retreat into cultural enclaves with separate social expectations, that baseline trust erodes, fracturing the population into competing factions. We look at Lakemba as just one prime example. That is an area which is now predominantly Muslim, with they don't openly say it, but the politicians know it. It has Islamic law there. People follow the Islamic rule, and many Westerners don't go into that area. That is an enclave. It's a cultural enclave now. Then we come to the tyranny of identity politics. Instead of uniting people under a shared national banner, institutional multiculturalism incentivizes, for a want of a better word, people to emphasize their differences to secure political representation, funding, or cultural concessions. We're seeing that now with Labor and the Islamic population. Labor is allowing so many Islamic people into Australia because they know that those groups will align more with Labor than they do with Conservatives and Christian groups and things like that. And they know that they will probably vote for them, which builds Labor's power. But then we'll start to get that factional separation again, like in the UK and like many other places, where the new culture starts getting into government and starts taking over. Now, let's look predominantly at Australia. Australia is, by any objective metric, one of the most successful multi-ethnic nations on this planet. Millions of people from every corner of the globe have moved to Australia and built thriving, peaceful lives. And we're better off for it. Australia is a better nation for it. But we need to look at why this works so well. It worked because historically, Australia's model favoured integration into a strong, pre-existing civic culture, rather than the absolute tribal fragmentation of hard multiculturalism. In this multi-ethnic model, an Australian can be of Vietnamese, Italian, Lebanese or Scottish descent and still be 100% Australian because they subscribe to the core civic culture. The surface level culture, the food, the festivities, the languages spoken in the different homes, enriches the nation. But the foundational culture, the respect for liberal democracy, the rule of law, gender equality, and individual freedom remains non-negotiable for the time being here in Australia. We're seeing that being changed nearly every week. And this is the multi-ethnic ideal. A diverse locker room, but everyone is wearing the same team jersey and playing by the exact same rules. Now, what I mean by that is, with a lot of these multicultural people coming in to our nation, there's been people go and ask them, okay, if a war was to erupt between Australia and the nation you came from, whether it be Sudan, Somalia, anywhere like that, Iran, Palestine, would you take up arms and fight for Australia or for your home country where you were born, that you escaped from because you said you were an economic refugee? Which one would you fight for? And you know what? So many of them turn around and say, oh, my motherland. So they would not fight for Australia, even though Australia is giving them a good home and it's providing their needs, it's given them sanctuary, and they would still fight for the country that has apparently oppressed them. Now we need to look to where the danger arises when we drift from being a proud multi-ethnic nation into a fractured multicultural one, because that's starting to happen now. Specifically when we accommodate the cultures that hold values fundamentally incompatible with Australian societal culture. Now, Australia was founded and raised on Judeo-Christian principles, and that has done us brilliantly. We don't need other faiths coming in here, dominant faiths, powerful faiths, violent faiths in some aspects, but very subversive faiths coming into this country and taking away what has done us so well since our colonisation here. We need to look into that. We need to understand that, because culture isn't neutral. Some cultural frameworks across the world don't believe in the equality of men and women. We see that when we go to the shopping centres and we see women walking around in the bin bag setup. Sorry, I can't remember the name of it right now, so that's the better sort of description I can say. And I don't mean to be offensive by that, because I think if that's the case, everyone, men and women, should be allowed to walk around in the bin bag setup and see where that gets us nationwide. But that's my opinion. But we're seeing more and more. Like, I live in a little regional country town in Queensland, Australia, and I'm seeing every weekend more and more multi-ethnic groups in the shopping centres that it's clear that they're also trying to bring their culture here as well. And remember, culture isn't neutral. Some don't believe in religious freedom, asserting that leaving or criticising faith should be punished, and punished by the most heinous ways possible, because how others choose to live their life, when the Christian way is love everyone. And that's what we were raised, this nation was raised on. Not, that certain group of people should be thrown off a building. Some don't accept the supremacy of a secular legal system over their religious law. If Australia allows its civic fabric to be watered down under the guise of multicultural tolerance, tolerating practices and ideologies that actively despise Western liberal values, the consequences won't discriminate based on skin colour. It will be detrimental to every single Australian, regardless of their ethnicity. And think about it. Who loses if gender equality is eroded in certain communities? The women living in those communities lose first. Who loses if freedom of speech is compromised to avoid offending specific cultural sensitivities? The writers, the thinkers, the ordinary citizens of every background lose. And when you compromise the foundational values that made a nation safe, wealthy and free in the first place, you destroy the very sanctuary that immigrants travelled across the world to find. And they don't care about that. They just want to take over. We don't have to guess what happens when a country prioritises state multiculturalism over civic integration. We can look directly at the United Kingdom. Again, I'll mention the United Kingdom, because for decades the UK pursued a policy of state multiculturalism. Instead of encouraging newcomers to integrate into British civic life, the state took a hands-off approach, allowing parallel societies to develop. In the pursuit of political correctness and fear of being labelled intolerant or racist, authorities repeatedly turned a blind eye to a deep cultural misalignments. And we're seeing where that led them now, with the troubles they're having on the streets now, with the grooming gang problem that was let carry on for so long because the authorities turned a blind eye. The results have been devastating for their social cohesion, and it will be the same here. The growth of unofficial parallel arbitration courts that often disadvantage women in domestic disputes. Severe social integration, where entire neighbourhoods where people do not speak the primary language. Here it's English, and they don't mingle with the broader population, and they hold views entirely at odds with the broader British value over there, Australian values here. And the silencing, this is a big one, the silencing of criticism, where you can't speak your mind, you can't have an opinion because hurty words might offend someone. A culture of fear where public figures journalists, and even law enforcement hesitate to address systemic social issues within specific communities for fear of stoking community tensions. And we're seeing that in the UK with the Islamic community, but also now, after recently, with the Sikh community as well. And now the UK's experience, to me, is a warning sign for us. It proves that compassion without boundaries leads to chaos. Labour loves chaos. It proves that if you don't demand alignment with your nation's core values, you will eventually lose the values altogether. And do you want to lose Australia's values? Australia's strength lies in its ability to be a home for people of every race and ethnicity. We should protect and celebrate our multi-ethnic reality, but we must be uncompromising when it comes to our cultural core. We cannot compromise with our cultural heritage, our cultural core. Otherwise, we will lose it. And newcomers of any background are welcome as an addition to the Australian story, provided they leave behind their rivalries, their tribalism, and especially their radical extremist values that oppose freedom, democracy, and equality. We must insist on a single, shared societal culture. Not to restrict people, but to preserve the very freedom that makes Australia a place worth migrating to in the first place. Now, I don't agree with a lot of what Pauline Hanson says, but I agree with her that Australia needs to be a multi-ethnic nation, but not so much a multicultural nation. We need to keep our culture as the predominant, as the overwhelming force in this country that has done us so well. I'm Brian. This is Voice in the Wilderness Australia. Hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And I'll see you in the next video.